Biology has shaped the way men and women cooperate and has done so since prehistory, and the lesson of how it has done so is still important for understanding the way men and women cooperate today. But in particular, I focus on the fact that women have paid a price for the way in which we cooperate, and it's a price that we can understand better if we dig sufficiently hard into the roots of our evolutionary past. I think the first and important lesson is that conflict is at the heart of cooperation. Conflict and cooperation are two sides of the same coin. It's when you have a lot to cooperate about, when you have potentially large gains from cooperation, that there is so much temptation to be in conflict about the terms under which you do that. It's precisely because when parties have a lot to share from cooperation that the question how those gains are to be shared becomes so urgent and so difficult. The central idea that anybody studying economics looks at is scarcity. Different resources are differently scarce, and the value of those resources reflects their scarcity. Now, the really striking thing about sexual reproduction is the different scarcity of the gametes, the sex cells that the two sexes bring. Eggs in any species that has females and males, which not all species do, are scarce. They're larger than the male gametes. They typically come with some nutritional resources, and there are not very many of them. So women, female human beings produce an egg at a rate of 1 a month. Male produce 1,000 sperm a second. Now, it's because the obstacles to fertilization are not merely logistical. They're about the negotiation of the male and the female interests in reaching fertilization that the most interesting and difficult questions about sexual reproduction arise. And notably, what has happened is that natural selection has selected for selectivity in females and persistence in males. Why selectivity? Because females who have this scarce resource don't wish to waste it on unsuitable males, and males who find themselves in excess compared to the limited number of available female gametes will then undertake all sorts of strategies, some very manipulative, some very persuasive, some very seductive, some very violent, to ensure that their gametes are selected over and above all of the competing ones. The male persistence has tended to take one of two broad types. This was something that Charles Darwin wrote about in his great book, The Descent of Man, and he was fascinated by the way in which male persistence sometimes expresses itself through force, through violence, either through fighting between rival males, or force exerted on females by males, and sometimes it's expressed itself through signaling. Through competitive signaling to try to induce females to cede to the charms of the male signalers. Conflict between males and females occurs even over something as simple as where and how to mate. Females, after all, have mating opportunities which are scarce, which should not be wasted, and for males, those mating opportunities are potentially not so scarce, and a male that mates in one context is still able to mate relatively soon afterwards, unlike a female for whom mating involves a major commitment of her body, of her resources. Here are the antennae of a water strider. Now, the relatively delicate antennae on the left belong to the female. The antennae on the right involve some grappling hooks that appear to have evolved for the sole purpose of holding down recalcitrant females. So these are adaptive pieces of anatomy that unfortunately, appear to have no other purpose. And what they illustrate is a point that is worth coming back to again and again, which is that natural selection never selects for optimal or adaptive relationships. Natural selection selects for particular traits which may be adaptive in the sense that they get themselves copied. But it's quite possible for the traits in the female to get themselves copied and the traits in the male to get themselves copied, and the result to be messy, violent, inefficient, wasteful. Now, you might think that against that, signaling behavior is likely to be a rather pleasant sort of thing, and indeed a rather efficient sort of thing. But though omnipresent, though essential, is hugely wasteful. So the poster child for the wastefulness of signaling is the peacock, it's hard to imagine an appendage that could be more unlikely to help the bird to hide from predators, to escape predators, in general, to survive and leave its offspring. But it grows it because the female has learned to prefer it. And females prefer large tails, not for arbitrary reasons, but because these are known to be correlated with other indicators of fitness in the male. Now, one of the things you notice is that precisely because of the asymmetry that I described in terms of the scarcity of the gametes, this means that the signaling tends to be done by the sex with the abundant gametes. So it's the males here who are signaling. This primate has the unusual feature that all of those individuals that you see there in the front row that look like males are actually females. And what it illustrates is something about what Homo sapiens has done. The signaling is being done by both sexes. They're signaling to each other. So there's bilateral signaling in Homo sapiens, which is a little different from many other species. The females are not having to cope with any problem of the available quantity of males, but a good man is notoriously hard to find, and it could be that there's something about male quality that is scarce. Some species, like our own, have developed elaborate forms of signaling that are bilateral. Signaling to other people, not only members of the other sex, but also to our colleagues, our employers, and so on, is a very big part of the story about both what makes us human more generally and what holds us back sometimes from realizing the possibilities that our cooperative natures make available to us. Now, the difference between us and most of the other animals really resides in the very large-scale cooperation that we have undertaken. We, in particular, we invested in something that doesn't exist on the same scale anywhere else in the animal kingdom, which is the long childhood. Our offspring are dependent on us for much, much longer than those of any other animal, and they require massively greater investment. And in particular, they require investment that mothers cannot make on their own. The kind of alliances that a mother needs to construct to look after her children don't just involve the biological father of the child, although they may do, but involve a whole coalition of other parties, including the grandparents of the child, including other males, other females in a group. And essentially, life in forager societies for women was about building the alliances that were necessary to give your children the chance to survive. Millennia, actually more than that, millions of years of a division of labor that persisted throughout prehistory has essentially been abolished in a matter of a few decades by an unprecedented and extraordinary tide of female talent that has swept into large areas of economic life that were previously occupied only by men. What has happened since World War II has been spectacular. Women's participation in the labor force has risen from just under 30% to just under 60%. And in fact, if you include women who do not have children under the age of 5, their participation in the United States, at least, is as high as that of men. In particular, women now occupy a small majority of jobs that the US Bureau of Labor Statistics calls managerial and professional jobs. So by that criterion, it looks as though, in some sense, all of the important general areas of previously male work have now been opened to women. And it's in the light of that extraordinary development, and extraordinarily rapid development, that the remaining puzzles seem even harder to understand. One is the fact that some occupations continue to have very low participation of women. So if we start with things like the fact that women make up only 32% of lawyers, 32% of physicians and surgeons, 25% of architects, you can then construct a list going down to some truly remarkable statistics, such as that women make up only 1.2% of airline pilots.